The gavel hit wood. "Court is adjourned," the judge said, already half-turned from the bench. Dad squeezed my sister Tanya's hand like he'd just won something he hadn't paid for. I walked to the rail and set one envelope down. The clerk slid it to the judge. He glanced, stopped, and raised one eyebrow. "Bailiff," he said even. "Lock the doors. No one leaves." The room went quiet. Dad looked at the envelope, then at me, like both things were strangers. That's the part folks in Lancaster tell each other. The part before it is why it mattered. The first night back, I slept in my '09 Ford F-150 behind hocking feed and grain, key between my fingers the way the chaplain taught me. The lot smelled like corn and diesel. I cracked the window and watched the sky go from charcoal to pewter. At dawn, I washed up at the gas station sink and drank coffee that tasted like heat. I drove the long way to the farm because I didn't want to see it, and I did. The fields were shaved to stubble. The red barn leaned. A blue tarp snapped on the ridge. The porch step was still cracked. I found Dad at VFW Post 1380 over a bud and yesterday's sports page. The hall kept the old smoke in the wood. His cap said, "Korea." "Mornin' Ray," the bartender said. "Truck make it?" Dad asked without looking up. "Made it," I said. "Roof didn't." He grunted. "Taxes bit me. Mortgage, too." "I can help," I said. "Back pay a little disability night shift at the truck stop." He turned his head like thunder far off. "You do that," he said. "You save it, it's yours." I didn't answer quick. Joy spooks easy. I crossed to the recorder's office, where the floor wax smells like lemons, and the line moves the speed of paper. Misty Caldwell looked over her readers. "If he's really giving it to you, you want a warranty deed signed and notarized, and you want it recorded. Recordation gives notice to the world." "I'd settle for notice to Fairfield County," I said. "Keep receipts," she added. "If it isn't on paper, it didn't happen." I started stacking paper. At the bank, a teller named Joey printed cashier's checks for arrears. At the treasurer, a woman with a sunflower pin stamped paid on 2 years of taxes. At Greeley's Hardware, I bought shingles and felt. Mr. Greeley told me to nail slow and straight. At night, I parked at Alley Park, where deputies are used to veterans cooling off. The lake folded the moon. I slid the folder behind the passenger seat, where a trauma kit used to ride, and slept the kind of sleep that keeps its boots on. Saturday. I put the papers on Dad's kitchen table coffee ring in the wood farm. Report low on the radio, Tanya's senior photo still crooked. "If you sign this deed," I said, "I'll keep the roof on. You can stay in the spare room until your knees and the VA sort themselves out. I don't need thanks. I need a signature." He stared like the paper might bite. "You trying to run me off my own land?" "It's our land," I said. "Bank disagrees. Let me fix that." "Get Pete," he said. "If Pete says it's clean, it's clean." Attorney Pete Danforth came with a notary seal that clicked like a stapler. He read the deed, asked Dad twice if he understood. Dad said he did. Pete watched him sign signed under the notary block and pressed his seal like a small son. "File it tomorrow," he told me. "Don't let it ride in your truck." I didn't. Misty took it and came back with a receipt. Instrument number 2023-11458, she said, writing it on a sticky note she pressed to my folder. "Book 7422, page 319. That's title in you, Ms. Morgan." Outside, the cold made my teeth feel long. On the courthouse steps, 2 kids in church clothes posed for a phone. I tucked the folder under my arm and drove past Fields Flat as a held breath to the lane. That night, I hauled shingles up the warped ladder and set them along the ridge. The roof smelled like tar and trying. I heated chili on a camp stove and ate it with a plastic spoon, looking at stars I knew by their army names. On Sunday, I set the recorded deed on the VFW bar, not to brag to be plain. Dad read the instrument number out loud, mouth moving like a man sounding out a hymn. "You did it," he said, a thin pride showing, then added, "Don't get cocky." "I won't," I said, "but I'll call a roofer." "You always were stubborn as a fence post," he said. The TV over his shoulder showed a courthouse somewhere else. "Courts for people who can't settle things," he muttered. Maybe, or maybe court is where paper gets a voice. 2 days later, the rumor started that I'd tricked him. Tanya said it at a church potluck. Someone said it louder at the hardware store. By the time it reached the feed mill, I was a grifter with a DD-214. I kept my head down and my hands busy. I kept the folder where I could touch it. When I parked by the sycamore, the house looked the same, but the hinge on something had started to turn. The night wind ran the tarp like a sail. I lay in the truck with the folder under my arm and thought of the chaplain's line. Some things you stack because stacking is a prayer. I counted shingles instead of sheep, and somewhere between counts decided not to move back in until the roof was right and the heat came on steady. Not pride, just respect for wood, for weather, for the kind of promises you put your name under. The gavel and the locked doors were months out, but truth has a long fuse. I had lit it with a seal and ink and my own name. The courthouse opened slow, like most things in Fairfield County. You can hear the mop bucket wheels before you hear voices. I was there when they unlocked folder under my arm, the one with the sticky note Misty had written, Instrument, Dama for 2023, Waiahama 4058. She waved me up to the counter without looking at the line. You want certified copies, she said, reaching for the deed. Keep the original safe. Copies for court banks, the cousin who says he knows a guy. How many, I asked. As many as make you sleep, she said. 3 will do. She stamped them one by one. The ink smell took me back to supply rooms and hand receipts. Chain of titles clean enough, she said, tapping the screen. Your dad held, now you hold. Anybody squawks, you show the book and page. People squawk, I said. They do, she said, and slid the papers back. If it isn't on paper, it didn't happen. Across the square, the treasurer's office felt like a school nurse's room, peppermints. In a jar, a quilted wall, hanging a woman with a sunflower pin and a voice like warm water. She printed 2 years' tax receipts and circled, paid. You can apply for the homestead exemption, she said. No promises, but it shaves a little. Little helps, I said. At the bank, Joey in the blue tie had the patience of a man who fishes alone. 2 cashier's checks, I told him, sliding the delinquency notice over. He read the numbers and whistled low. You sure, he said. I'm sure. He printed, stapled the stubs to a copy for me. Keep that folder thick, he said. Judges like thick. I stopped at Greeley's Hardware for roofing nails and a box cutter, then at the diner for eggs and toast. Martha Kilgore slid into the booth, uninvited church cardigan over a John Deere tea. Heard you're fixing the roof, she said. I drove past and saw you up there like a cat. Trying to beat the rain, I said. You need a hand to hold the ladder, she asked. I need a cup of coffee that doesn't taste like a tire, I said, and we both smiled. After breakfast, I drove the lane slow, watching the ditch because sometime in June it swallows a low axle. The farmhouse had that weary look places get when a man starts eating suppers out of cans. I parked by the sycamore and carried the folder inside like it was a newborn. Dad was at the table with the farm report and a bowl of cereal going soft. He looked up at the sight of the folder, then back at the spoon. I got certified copies, I said. Taxes are current, mortgage is current. You can put that radio on and not feel guilty for a week. He shrugged. Shouldn't have fallen behind. Shouldn't sure, I said. But it did. We're caught up. He picked at a dry patch in the laminate where a hot pan had sat. Tanya says you're moving fast, he said. Says fast is how people get took. Fast is how roofs get covered before it snows, I said, and how banks don't call it dinner. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He looked at the deed copy like a test he hadn't studied for. I set it gently by his elbow. I put tabs in the folder, I said. Deed taxes, mortgage receipts. If you want to see something, ask, and I'll show you. You always like tabs, he said, half a smile. Army made you tidy, I guess. Army made me alive, I said. In the afternoon, I took pictures, the roof line, the chimney flashing, the missing gutter on the north side. I printed them at the pharmacy and dated the backs with a ballpoint. Paper for my paper. Proof for the people who only believe what they can hold. Attorney Pete called that evening. Do yourself a favor, he said. Draft a 1-page memorandum of understanding. Plain language. He exchanged this for that. Get a witness to sign. Doesn't have to be fancy. Just one more brick in your wall. Who'll witness, I asked. Martha Will, he said. She's watched half this county marry and bury. She did. At her kitchen table, under a clock that ticked like a heartbeat, Dad wrote in his slow, square hand, Ray covers arrears and taxes. The farm is hers. He dated it without looking at me. Martha signed under his name. I signed last. Pete notarized the next morning. Make a copy, Martha said. Give me one for my cookie tin. I've got everybody's secrets in there anyway. On the good days, Dad was almost himself joked with the mail carrier, shook out the rug, called me kiddo, like I was still in high school tugging on spare parts at his small engine shed. On the bad days, he got quiet and careful, like every word cost him. Sometimes he'd stand on the porch in that old Korea cap and watch the road as if waiting for a parade he'd forgotten to tell us about. The VFW was its own weather system. Some afternoons the bar warmed a man. Other nights it gathered clouds. I sat with Earl when the weather was fair. I left when the talk turned mean. Someone told the story of a nephew who signed a power of attorney and lost his pontoon boat. Someone else said their cousin's ex-wife took the farm and ran off with a roofer. You could feel old hurts loosen like screws. Folks talk, the bartender said when I paid Dad's tab and tucked the receipt into my folder. They don't always mean it. They always mean it in front of a judge, I said. He nodded. True enough. I worked nights at the truck stop off 33 coffee refills and ring-ups, the kind of conversations you only have at 2 a.m., drivers swapping grandkid pictures, a kid headed west with a guitar case, and a soft lie about an aunt in Denver. I learned which deputies sat their cups where and how to tell a man who wants to tell you about his war and a man who needs to be left with his own. When the shift ended, I bought a shower and let the hot water try its best on a body held together by duct tape and stubbornness. Mondays. I drove to the recorder's office to annoy Misty on purpose. Anything filed on the parcel, I'd ask. She'd type, click squint. Not unless raccoons learn to record, she'd say. You're still clean. She started keeping a clipboard with my name on it, so I don't have to hear that truck stop coffee breath first thing, she teased. I labeled new tabs, photos, roof, deputy cards for the lane just in case, VA letters. I put the memorandum of understanding in a plastic sleeve and tucked a copy into Martha's cookie tin. I listened more than I spoke. I answered when asked. I didn't throw elbows. I didn't apologize for breathing. And still, the squawk grew. At church, someone said, bless your heart in the way that isn't a blessing. At the feed mill, a man I didn't know asked if I liked taking old men's toys. At the hardware store, I picked up nails and heard Tanya 2 aisles over, her voice sweet and sharp. We'll see what a judge says. Judges say what the paper says, Mr. Greeley muttered when I set the box on the counter. Sometimes they say what the loudest person says, I answered. Not if the quiet person brings a good folder, he said, and bagged my change with the nails. I mailed off for the roof permit and stacked shingles along the ridge before dusk. The sky went the color of bruised blue and then eased into clear. A fox trotted the fence line, unbothered by our human wars. I ate cold chicken on the tailgate and listened to frogs test their voices. When I came off the ladder, there was a car at the end of the lane. Tanya sat inside with the engine running, window down, just enough to let out smoke. She didn't wave. I didn't either. We've never been good at pretend. Evening, I said when I finally walked over. Evening, she said. You got busy hands. Better than busy mouth. She smiled without showing teeth. You always thought you were smarter, she said. No, I said I just kept receipts. She drove away, slow gravel ticking the undercarriage. The dust hung in the beam of my headlamp and then settled like it always does. The first envelope I handed a judge was months off. The next one I handled came with a green return receipt card and the county seal. The certified letter came with the green card. You have to sign the one that makes your stomach feel like a pocket with a hole in it. The clerk had stamped Fairfield County in purple, and the return address was the courthouse. I signed for it on the hood of my truck with a pen that wouldn't start until the third scratch. Inside summons. Earl Morgan v. Ray Morgan. Complaint to set aside deed. Words like undue influence, lack of consideration, incapacity. It said I had 28 days from service to answer. A second page set a date for a status conference, 6 Thursdays, out at 9 a.m. in front of Judge Alan R. Whitaker. I called Pete Danforth before I finished reading. "Bring your folder," he said. In a calm face. Paper answers, paper. His office smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. He put on his readers and slid the summons under a brass paperweight shaped like a Civil War cannon. "This is what people do when they don't like yesterday," he said. "They try to rewrite it with different signatures." He tapped the complaint. "We'll answer, we'll attach exhibits, we'll ask for a declaratory judgment that the title stands, and we'll request a protective order keeping your father and anyone he sends from interfering with the property." I set my folder on his desk. He flipped through the tabs like a man turning over fence pickets. Deed, instrument number, tax receipts, cashier's checks. That memorandum of understanding Martha witnessed, good. Photos of the roof, good. Make copies of everything. Judges, like thick. "You're the second person to say that," I said. "Then take it as gospel," he said, and pulled a yellow legal pad close. Affirmative defenses. Consideration paid. Deed validly executed. Recorded. No fraud. No coercion. We'll subpoena the recorder, the treasurer, the bank teller, Mr. Greeley, and Martha. We'll keep you off the drama line. Let the paper talk." On the way out, I passed a glass case with photographs of old courthouse teams, softball bowling faces lit by the pride of shirts with names on the back. Small towns keep their trophies in the hall so they don't have to keep them in their chests. That Friday, the VFW held a fish fry. Grease and laughter and the kind of bright lights that make every plate look the same. I bought a ticket and stood with a styrofoam box and a little cup of coleslaw, nodding at men who had taught their grandsons to bait a hook and their sons to button a dress uniform. Earl came late with Tanya, loud at the door. He saw me, and he saw the folder under my arm, and he made a calculation only he understood. "She's just a homeless veteran looking to cash out," he said to no one and everyone. Forks stopped moving. Someone cleared a throat. The bartender said, "Earl," not loud enough. I looked at the floor, then at the exit sign, then at him. I said nothing, because the right word at the wrong time loses 2/3 of its weight. I put cash on the counter for 2 dinners, and I left mine and Dad's names on the tickets. I ate in the cab of my truck with the windows cracked and the sound of the river in the dark, and then I drove to the farm and climbed the ladder and nailed shingles until the hammer felt like part of my hand. On Sunday, after church in the parking lot where people exchange recipes and rumors, Tanya stood by a minivan with the side door open and 3 kids inside like laundry. Her voice carried. She made him sign. When he wasn't right, she told a woman who loved the Lord and loved the latest. She said she'd fix things, and now she's taking. Martha Kilgore put a hand on my elbow and squeezed. "You can't talk a hole closed," she said. "You can only fill it." "I've been filling," I said. "I know," she said. "Half the county knows. The other half will catch up." The status conference landed on a gray morning that never quite decided to be rain. The courthouse had the smell all courthouses have: old varnish floor wax and paper warmed by human hands. A bailiff I hadn't met yet. Mr. Lane pointed people to benches and taped a sign to a door: "No food or drink." His voice carried without effort. He'd been given that kind of voice by God or boot camp. The docket sheet was clipped to a board outside the courtroom. Morgan v. Morgan. It looked like a joke I'd seen before. Inside, lawyers made weather in little circles. Some wore suits that fit. Some didn't. Earl came in a sport coat that pulled at the shoulders and a tie that had seen the inside of glove boxes. Tanya's heels made a sound like trying too hard. Pete sat beside me and slid a copy of our answer and counterclaim across my knee. Exhibit A through Exhibit H marched in a neat column deed. Instrument number, tax receipts, bank stubs, memorandum, photos, a letter from the treasurer, a page from the recorder's index showing my name in black and white. Judge Whitaker entered with the confidence of a man who knows where his pen is. People stood. We sat at his nod. He scanned the top of the docket. "Good morning," he said. "We're here on Morgan versus Morgan case number." He read the number like a string of fence posts for a scheduling and status conference on plaintiff's petition to set aside a deed. Pete stood. Good morning, Your Honor. Peter Danforth for the defendant, Ms. Morgan. Earl's lawyer stood. He had a part in his hair, sharp enough to measure with. Good morning, Your Honor. Randall Pike for the plaintiff, Mr. Morgan. The judge looked over his glasses. I have the pleadings, he said. I see an answer and a counterclaim for declaratory relief with attached exhibits. I see a petition alleging undue influence and lack of consideration. He glanced at the clock. Counsel, I will set this for an evidentiary hearing. Given the calendar, 6 Thursdays from today at 9 a.m. Witness lists due 2 weeks before. Exhibits pre-marked and exchanged. No surprises unless you enjoy sanctions. Pete nodded. Understood, Your Honor. Earl started to say something, a sound from deep in his chest that wanted to be a man's old rights. The judge held up a hand without looking at him. Sir, you'll have your say when it's your turn. Today, we set dates. In the hallway, after the air felt thinner, people who didn't have business that day lingered anyway, the way folks watch storms come in from the west. Earl stood close enough that I could smell aftershave and something under it like fear. Gonna see what a judge thinks of your tricks, he said. Judges think what the paper says, I answered. He leaned in. You think you're better, because you've got a folder, he said. You're sleeping in a truck like a stray. Then don't push me off the porch when I fix your roof, I said. I'm not walking away from my name on a deed. Mr. Lane's shadow covered us, then his voice. Take it outside or take it down, he said. Hallway isn't for arguing. It's for breathing. We were breathing, I said. Then do it quieter, he said and moved on. Pete touched my sleeve. Don't make me spend billable hours on hallway skirmishes, he said. Save your breath for the witness chair. Save your hands for the roof. We'll send subpoenas tomorrow. Recorder Treasurer Bank hardware owner Martha. We'll file a motion for a temporary protective order so nobody comes onto that property to inspect the premises without your say-so. Outside, the clouds finally picked a side and let go a steady, sensible rain. I stood under the courthouse overhang and watched Main Street shine. The man from the diner hustled across with 2 to-go cups. He pressed one into my hand. On Martha, he said. She said, you don't need a sermon, you need coffee. True, I said. Back at the farm, I slid plastic over the stacks of shingles and tucked the tarps down tight. The rain drummed a rhythm you could set your heart to. I carried my folder to the kitchen and laid it open on the table next to the cereal bowl Dad had left that morning, spoon afloat like a boat that didn't know the tide had turned. I added the summons, the answer, the scheduling order, the list of dates Pete had written out in square block print a Marine would approve of. I wrote each deadline in a school notebook and stuck it to the inside cover like I was back on duty and the mission was paper. That night in the truck, the chaplain's advice came back, stack what you can stack. The rest will meet you where it meets you. I set the folder on the passenger seat where a partner would sit. I watched the wipers push the rain aside and thought about the thing people call pride, and the other thing people confuse with it that is only keeping your word. 6 Thursdays wasn't so long. In a small county, everybody knows when a hearing is coming. The quiet gathers like hay in a loft. You don't see it until the day you climb the ladder and realize the loft is full. 6 Thursdays shrink when you fill them with paper. Pete said that in his office, while he handed me a stack of little round stickers that said, Def a Def B, all the way to Def H. Pre-mark them, he said. You don't want to be fumbling at the table like you're sorting coupons. I took the stickers home and turned the kitchen into a small print shop. The manila folder had swollen into a binder with tabs so clean you could shave with them. I printed my roof photos as 8x10s and glued plain labels under each north eave missing gutter. Chimney flashing lifted, ridge before repair, ridge after repair. I slipped everything into sleeves that made the pages whisper when you turned them. Martha came over with a pie she claimed wasn't a bribe. I'm no good with microphones, she said. I'll tell the truth, but I don't love rooms with flags. There's no microphone, I said. Pete says you'll sit, you'll say your name, you'll tell the judge what you saw me on the roof, me paying taxes at the treasurer, Dad, signing a 1-page memo at your table. No speeches, no guesses, just the parts you touched. I can touch those parts, she said, setting the pie on the counter. And I can bring cookies for the clerk because clerks see everything first. At the recorder's office, Misty let me sit on the staff side while she rehearsed. State your name, I said. Misty Ann Caldwell, she answered, half amused. What do you do? I serve as deputy recorder for Fairfield County. I index and record deeds and other instruments affecting real property. Do you recognize this? I handed her a certified copy. She glanced at the instrument number 2023 1458 the way a grocer glances at a barcode he's rung 100 times. I do, she said. Warranty deed from Earl Morgan to Ray Morgan. Recorded May 18th, book 742, page 319, notarized by Peter Danforth. What does recording do? Gives notice to the world, she said, and tapped the seal. We both smiled. Don't say it like that on the stand, I said. Pete says judges don't like poetry. I'll say, it means the transfer is part of the public record available to anyone. At the bank, Joey printed duplicate stubs of the cashier's checks and slid a handwritten note across, paid to cure arrears loan. Ending 3017. He practiced saying his own name like he'd never said it out loud before. Your Honor, my name is Joseph Crane. I'm a teller at First County. On May 15th, Ms. Morgan purchased 2 cashier's checks and delivered them to... Stop right there, I said and smiled. You'll be fine. Mr. Greeley frowned at the idea of court like it was a leaky pipe. I'll tell the judge you bought shingles and nails and a ridge vent, he said, ringing up a handful of screws for a man behind me. I'll tell him you asked about flashing, and I told you not to cheap out. That's all I know. That's exactly enough, I said. 2 days later, a deputy in a brown uniform knocked on my truck window in the early morning blue and apologized for the startle. He handed me 4 subpoenas with the county seal like a coin pressed into paper recorder, treasurer, bank teller, hardware owner. Service on your father went through yesterday, he said. He wasn't happy. Did he say anything to you? I asked. He said a lot to his porch railing, the deputy said. To me, he said he'd see me in court, which I took as a threat to my calendar. At the treasurer's office, the woman with the sunflower pin highlighted dates on my receipts and used a ruler to keep the lines straight. I'll bring the ledger, she said. If counsel asks, I can testify to when payments posted and from whom. You make it sound like church, I said. She smiled. We have our hymns. Pete had me sit in his conference room with a glass of water and tell the story 3 times, each pass shorter than the last. You're not here to sell it, he said. You're here to lay it out. I paid this. He signed that. It was recorded here. I did this work. These people saw it. Keep the lane narrow. What about the homeless veteran thing, I asked? If he says it in the courtroom, I'll object, and the judge will tell him to stop being 12. If his lawyer slides toward it, I'll pull him back by his tie, Pete said. You say nothing about names. You talk paper. He watched me practice the oath, right hand up, left on the arm of the chair. We went over how to answer questions you don't like. Short, he said. Truth travels fine on short feet. The temporary protective order came in the mail like a school notice. No party may enter the farm dwelling or outbuildings without the current title holder's consent, pending final hearing. No harassment, no interference with repairs. It had a judge's signature that looked like a wave breaking. I posted a copy inside the front door and another in the kitchen by the old farm calendar where Dad kept track of planting by the moon. That afternoon, Earl pulled his pickup into the lane and left it idling while he sat behind the wheel. I opened the door and stood on the porch where the boards knew my step. He studied the house like a stranger studies a face he almost recognizes. You served me, he said. The county served you, I said. Same difference. He shut the engine off, and the cicadas came into the air he'd been drowning. This place, he said, and images moved across his face like clouds. My mother shelling peas, a busted hand on a cold beer, a 97 snow that broke the old maple. It's still this place, I said. You made it yours. You wrote it yours to mine. He looked at the paper I'd taped inside the glass and read it the way men his age read things they planned to argue with. In the end, he didn't argue. He turned the key again, and the truck coughed. You think a judge is going to like being told he's wrong? he said. I think a judge is gonna like being shown. He's right, I said. He drove away like someone leaving a field he'd plowed crooked and didn't have time to straighten. On my nights off, I stitched the binder tighter 2-hole punch for my timeline, a map of the parcel with the legal description that reads like a hymn in a language you only half know, thence north 88 degrees 14 minutes east. I wrote a list of questions I hoped no one would ask and practiced answers anyway. I laid out clothes for the hearing that wouldn't make a sound when I moved dark slacks, a navy blouse, boots cleaned with a toothbrush. I put a couple of photos of my mother in the back sleeve, not as exhibits, just ballast. The truck stop felt different now, as if the whole county took turns filling the night with breath while it waited for me to say my name. Drivers pushed their cups across the counter and asked if I was the girl fixing the old Morgan place. Trying to, I'd say. An older woman paid for my slice of pecan pie and said, I saw your dad at the VFW. He's loud because he's scared. I nodded because I knew about loud and about scared. The week before the hearing, Pete and I sat in the empty courtroom while Mr. Lane checked exit lights and polished the brass on the rail. Pete pointed to the witness stand. You'll sit there, he said. You'll speak up, you'll speak slow, and you'll look at the judge when you answer. When opposing counsel asks a question that isn't a question, you'll wait for me to object. If the judge says answer, you answer. If he says sustained, you sit in your quiet. Where do I put my hands? I asked. On your knees, he said. Keep them off your heart. Jury's notice. We don't have a jury, but the benches will be full of the same eyes. Mr. Lane caught my eye and nodded once. It felt like a benediction from a man who worships at the altar of order. On the way out, I pressed my palm flat to the wood of the double doors, scarred warm and older than anybody who walked through them that day. I thought of all the people who had stood where I was standing, each of them carrying their own folder, their own proof, their own small story that mattered, like a roof matters in November. The last Thursday ticked toward us. I slept with the binder on the passenger seat like it needed a seatbelt. In the morning, I woke before the sun and drank coffee that tasted like hope's bitter cousin. Somewhere a fox moved the fence line. Somewhere a judge capped a pen. Somewhere my father rehearsed what he was going to say to make yesterday different. I rehearsed saying my name. The courthouse smelled like oiled wood and raincoats. I got there early enough to hear Mr. Lane's keys before the first voice. Pete met me on the steps with a paper cup of coffee and a nod that said, both good morning and stay between the lines. My binder rode under my arm like a careful dog. Inside the benches filled the way, pews fill slow, polite, curious. VFW caps, a farm co-op jacket, Martha in her church cardigan, Misty with her hair pinned back like she was going to a school picture. Joey from the bank tugged at his tie as if it had opinions. The treasurer's sunflower pin shone like a small sun. Call case, Mr. Lane said, voice easy as a bell. Morgan versus Morgan, the clerk answered, and we stood when Judge Whitaker came and settled when he told us to. Good morning, he said, and made it sound like a standard that must be met. We're here on plaintiff's petition to set aside a recorded deed. Counsel appearances. Peter Danforth for the defendant, Ms. Morgan Pete said. Randall Pike. For the plaintiff, Mr. Morgan. The other lawyer said part in his hair sharp enough to cut line. No opening statements, the judge said. We'll take the evidence. Then I'll hear brief argument if necessary. Plaintiff bears the burden. Mr. Pike. Pike started with Earl. Dad took the stand like a man stepping onto a porch he built himself. He raised his right hand for the oath and his left fisted on his thigh as if to anchor him to something that wouldn't move. Mr. Morgan Pike said, did you sign a deed transferring your farm to your daughter? I did, Dad said, looking at Pike and not at me. Why? She said she'd fix things. I wasn't myself. I'd been weak. Weak, how? Pike asked. Earl's eyes flicked to Tanya on the bench and then to the flag. Drinking some, he said. And worry. I didn't understand papers. Pike nodded like a doctor confirming a flu. Did she pressure you? She put papers in front of me, Dad said. Said sign. Did she pay you anything of value? Pike asked, landing on consideration, like a man stepping on a dock. Dad hesitated half a breath too long. She said she'd pay taxes, he said finally. I don't know what all she paid. No further questions, Pike said, letting the hesitation hang like laundry. Pete stood. Mr. Morgan, he said gentle, as weather. Do you remember meeting at your kitchen table with your daughter? Yes. Do you remember Attorney Danforth, me coming to your house with a notary seal and reading the deed aloud to you? Dad's jaw worked. I remember. Do you remember me asking if you understood that by signing, you were transferring the farm to your daughter? I remember. Did anyone force your hand onto that pen? No, he said. Thank you, Pete said. That's all for now? Misty went next. She sat straight hands, folded oath taken like a promise she'd made before. State your name, Pete said. Misty Ann Caldwell, Deputy Recorder, Fairfield County. Do you recognize defendant's exhibit? Pete held up a certified copy of the deed with Def A smiling in its corner. I do. Warranty deed from Earl Morgan to Ray Morgan. Instrument number 2023 by 5458, Book 742, page 319. Recorded May 18th at 3:14 p.m. Notarized by Peter Danforth. What does recording do? Pete asked. It makes the transfer part of the public record, she said. Puts anyone who checks on notice that title changed. Pike tried his hand. Ms. Caldwell, do you have any personal knowledge of Mr. Morgan's mental state on May 18th? No, she said. Do you know if Ms. Morgan pressured her father? No, she said. So you can't tell the court whether this deed was fair. I can tell the court it was recorded, she said, mild as milk. Thank you, Pike said, annoyed at a door that only opens one way. Joey from the bank came with fresh shaved nerves. Joseph Crane, he said, teller at First County. On May 15th, Ms. Morgan purchased 2 cashier's checks numbers 773 and 7714 in amounts that matched the arrears on loan ending 3017. Our records show those checks posted against that mortgage the same day. Paid by whom? Pete asked. By Ms. Morgan, Joey said. I watched her sign the payment slips. Pike stood too quick. Mr. Crane, do you know why Ms. Morgan paid? No, Joey said. I know that she did. The treasurer took the stand and turned the courtroom into a ledger that breathed. Real estate tax for parcel 033 Condo E7 paid current as of June 1st, she said. Receipts here. She tapped neatly highlighted lines. Payer of record, Ray Morgan. Mr. Greeley frowned at the oath like it didn't fit, but wore it anyway. I own Greeley's Hardware, he said. Sold Ms. Morgan shingles, nails, ridge vent felt. She asked about flashing. I told her don't cheap out. Saw her truck go by heavy more than once. That's all I know. That's enough, Pete said, and meant it. Martha sat like a woman at a potluck, polite and ready to pass whatever the court needed. Name's Martha Kilgore, she said. I've lived on County Road 9 all my born days. I saw Ray on that roof 3 Saturdays in a row. I stood under the ladder and handed up shingles. I watched Earl sign a 1-page agreement at my table that said, Ray covers arrears and taxes. The farm is hers. I signed as a witness. Pike rose, eyes bright at the word agreement. Miss Kilgore, are you a lawyer? No. Did you advise Mr. Morgan? I poured coffee, she said. The benches chuckled once before Mr. Lane's look put the chuckle away. Pike changed tack. Isn't it true you favor Miss Morgan? I favor roofs that don't leak, she said. She's the one up there with the hammer. Pete put me on last. The witness chair was just a chair, but it held a different weight. I took the oath and said my name and spelled it because that's what you do when your name matters. Ms. Morgan, Pete said, did you coerce your father into signing a deed? No, I said. Did you pay anything of value in exchange? I paid the mortgage arrears and 2 years of back taxes, I said. I paid for materials and began repairs. Why did you record the deed? So no one could say later it didn't happen, I said. So the record would match the truth. Pike stood with a rustle of good fabric. Ms. Morgan, he said, where do you sleep? In my truck, I said. He turned to the judge as if he'd opened a trap. Your Honor, the defendant calls herself a homeless veteran. She doesn't even live. Mr. Pike, the judge said, quiet steal, you will ask questions about the deed and consideration. You will not label this witness. Pike swallowed. Do you live at the farm? I work there every day. I'm not at my job, I said. I'll move in when the roof is right and the heat is steady. I promised the house I'd respect it. Pike frowned. Promised the house. Wood remembers, I said. It's a thing I learned. No further questions, he said, like he was closing a book he didn't like. Pete handed up our exhibits one at a time. The labels put them in the judge's hands, like steps you can't miss. Deed, instrument number, receipts, photos, memorandum. He flipped made marks, flipped back his pen, ticking softly in the quiet. Counsel, he said finally, arguments. Pike stood, tried to weave undue influence out of air in old hurt. He talked about daughters and fathers, about moments of weakness, about the danger of paperwork in kitchen light. He said fast and pressured and not himself. He said homestead, like a man trying to borrow the goodness of the word. Pete answered with nouns. Deed, seal, recording, receipts, witnesses. Paper doesn't drink, he said. Paper doesn't gossip. Paper either shows up or it doesn't. The judge looked down for a long few breaths at our small history laid flat before him. I could hear the clock. I could hear Mr. Lane's shoe shift. I could hear Tanya's bracelet whisper against the bench. Earl stared at his hands like they might tell him what to say next. Ms. Morgan, the judge said at last, do you have anything further that has not already been admitted? I looked at Pete. He nodded once. I reached under the table and pulled out a plain envelope I hadn't opened for anyone but him. It was scuffed at the corners where my thumb had found it on long nights. I set it on the rail, slid it toward the clerk, and said what I had practiced saying without shaking. Just this, Your Honor. The envelope was soft at the corners where my thumb had lived. The clerk broke the old glue with a fingernail and laid the contents flat, like a nurse setting out instruments. Pete didn't rise. He knew what was there. The judge read the top page, then the second. He stopped on the third and raised his eyes to the ceiling, the way a man checks the weather through wood. Bailiff, he said, even and quiet. Lock the doors. No one leaves. The sound of the bolt was small and absolute. The benches settled. Tanya's bracelet didn't dare whisper. Counsel approached, the judge said. We stayed where we were. Pete shook his head once at me. Let him work. On the record, the judge said, tapping the third page with his pen the court has before it. The original memorandum of understanding signed by Mr. Morgan at Ms. Kilgore's table, already admitted as a copy, and a change of tax mailing address and owner statement filed with the treasurer's office on June 2nd, bearing Mr. Morgan's signature and the treasurer's date stamp listing owner Ray Morgan and directing all tax notices to Ms. Morgan's post office box. He held the page, so the stamp caught the light. There is also a utility transfer authorization, signed by Mr. Morgan on June 5th, authorizing service in Ms. Morgan's name at the farm address. He set the pages down with care. Mr. Morgan, he said, please stand. Dad stood like a man waking in a field where the rows don't line up. You testified moments ago that you didn't understand papers and that you were weak when you signed the deed, the judge said. Do you deny signing these subsequent documents in June, weeks after the deed affirming your daughter as owner for taxes and utilities? Dad's mouth opened-closed. I signed what they put in front of me, he said. Who is they? The judge asked. Dad looked at the floor as if a name might be written there. The lady at the window, he said, small. The court notes, the treasurer's form is self-initiated, the judge said. You filled in owner Ray Morgan. You wrote it in your own hand. You directed notices to Ms. Morgan. That is post-transfer conduct consistent with knowledge and acceptance of the deed. He let the words sit. Mr. Pike, you may wish to advise your client about the meaning of false statements under oath. Pike had gone pale in the tidy way of men who keep clean linens. Your Honor, my client is confused under stress, he managed. Confusion is not perjury, the judge said, but perjury enjoys borrowing that coat. He looked to Mr. Lane. "Keep the doors secured until we finish." "Yes, sir," Mr. Lane said, hands at ease, eyes doing all the work. The judge turned to me. "Ms. Morgan, did you obtain those June documents by any coercion?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "He asked me where to send the bills. I wrote my P.O. box on a sticky note. He copied it." Martha watched. Martha nodded once from the pew. I poured the coffee, she said under her breath, not meaning to be heard, and a small ripple of relief went through the room. The judge stacked the papers in order deed, instrument number, receipts, memorandum, the June forms. He clicked his pen and set it down. "The law is not complicated here," he said, voice level. "A recorded warranty deed. Instrument 2023 E11458, transferred title from Earl Morgan to Ray Morgan. Consideration was paid in the form of mortgage arrears and delinquent taxes. We have the stubs and receipts. The transfer was recorded in Book 742, page 319, giving notice to everyone who cares to look. Subsequent conduct by the grantor, Mr. Morgan, confirms the transfer owner's statement to the treasurer utility authorization. There is no credible evidence of undue influence, incapacity, or fraud." He let the last word sit like a nail you can't pull. Accordingly, he said the petition to set aside the deed is denied. The court enters declaratory judgment that title to the farm is vested in the defendant, Ms. Ray Morgan. The court further orders a protective order prohibiting the plaintiff, Mr. Morgan, or any person acting for him from entering the dwelling, outbuildings, or curtilage of the property without Ms. Morgan's express consent, and from harassing or interfering with repairs pending further order. Somewhere behind me, a VFW cap dipped, not quite a nod, more a laying down of arms. "Costs to the plaintiff," the judge added like a man closing a ledger. He looked at Dad. "Mr. Morgan, I am not the referee of your family. I am the referee of paper. Today, the paper wins because it carries the truth. If you continue to tell a different story under oath, you will meet a different part of me." Dad's shoulders lowered, as if someone had finally named the weight he'd been carrying and set it on the floor. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands and seemed surprised to find them empty. "Ms. Morgan," the judge said, turning to me, "you've behaved with restraint in a room where restraint is sometimes mistaken for weakness. It isn't. Keep your receipts. Keep your roof sound. If anyone tests the order I've entered, call the sheriff and bring your binder." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice sounded like a new board, plain and strong. Pike cleared his throat. "Your Honor," we would ask. "No," the judge said, not unkindly. "We're done." He nodded to Mr. Lane. The bolt turned back with a soft metal sigh. The room heard more than the gavel. No one moved for a breath anyway. Then the benches exhaled. Paper shuffled. A heel clicked and remembered itself. Martha touched the recorder's shoulder, like a woman handing a dish down a church table. Joey's tie finally let go of his throat. The sunflower pin caught the fluorescent light and threw it back as if to say, "We send the bills where they belong." Tanya stood and smoothed her skirt the way people do when they've run out of words that work. Her eyes went to mine, and then away. For a second, she looked like the girl in the crooked senior photo hair, sprayed and hopeful, before she learned the trick of sharpening a sentence until it cuts her own tongue. Dad didn't move. He sat while the room emptied halfway, and then looked up at me, the way a field looks at the weather. Wary, resigned, still proud in the way land is proud. "I was trying to keep a thing I thought I'd earned." He said, the words coming like freight that has to stop at every crossing. "You did earn it," I said. "Then you wrote it down. Then I carried it." He nodded once. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the space where either might one day take a chair. Outside, the rain had rinsed Main Street clean. People talked low in little knots under umbrellas. A VFW buddy of Dad's touched the bill of his cap to me and then to him, the way men tip their hats to storms and survivors. Pete came down the steps with his file, like a man stepping off a job done right. "You kept your lane?" he said. "That's harder than it looks." "Paper wins," I said. "Paper that shows up," he said. We stood there a second in the thin sun. Across the street, the diner had written, "Congrats, Ray," in chalk. So light the next rain would take it. The world moves on. It always does. But for a little while, in a small Ohio town, a deed carried a name, and the name carried back. Dad paused on the top step, hand on the rail. He didn't ask for a ride. I didn't offer. We had both learned to walk long distances without speaking. He touched the brim of the Korea cap to no one in particular and started down slow like a man crossing a field that isn't his anymore and never truly was. I put the envelope back in the binder, slid the deed stickers straight with a thumb, and felt the country steady under my boots. I drove back to the farm with the binder on the seat like a quiet passenger. The afternoon had washed itself clean. Water still ticked from the porch roof onto the pavers Dad set when my mother was alive. Uneven, but holding. I left my boots on the mat, took the protective order from its sleeve, and taped a second copy inside the pantry door, where a grocery list used to hang, no entry without consent. Not a dare. A boundary. I lit the camp stove and warmed a can of tomato soup because justice doesn't fix supper. While it bubbled, I pulled the blue tarp from the ridge and set fresh shingles where the old ones had curled like bad habits. The hammer felt lighter in my hand than it had the week before. Maybe it was the weight that came off the name. Maybe it was soup waiting. At dusk, I heard tires on gravel. A pickup idled at the end of the lane and stayed there. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped to the porch. Dad didn't get out. He held the wheel like it might bolt. After a minute, he put something on the dash. Thought better slid it to the passenger seat, then back to the dash. He laughed once, without amusement, shut off the engine, and walked halfway to the steps. He didn't try the first tread. He stayed where the yard turns into lane, where men feel less owned. "I'm not here to break the paper," he said. "I know I said." He set a small box on the post by the gate and stepped back like it might explode. "Roofing nails," he said. "Galvanized. They hold better through the first freeze." He swallowed. "And a thing I wrote." I picked up the box and found the note taped under the lid. I was wrong. Dad. The handwriting was thinner than I remembered. He tugged the brim of the Korea cap and looked away, like men do when they've shown you something you're not supposed to name. "You want soup?" I asked. "Not today," he said. "Someday." He started back, then turned. "When the stove's in, call me. I'll carry the first load of wood. That's not me breaking paper. That's me acting right." "I'll call," I said. We don't hurry at forgiveness out here. We let it walk beside us until we notice we're keeping pace. Next morning, I drove to the County Veteran Service Office, a low brick building that smells like coffee and photocopies. A man named Harold with a haircut that survived 3 wars pointed to forms and spoke in sentences without ornaments. "There's a small grant for critical home repairs," he said. "Roof qualifies. Veteran-owned property qualifies. Deed shows you hold title. We'll need 3 bids and a photo of that ridge." "I brought 4, I said, sliding photos from the binder like cards from a clean deck. He nodded once. "You folks who keep paper make my day easy," he said, and shook my hand like a man closing a gate. "We'll call when the check's cut to the contractor, not you." At Greeley's Hardware, I bought stovepipe and a used juddel. Someone's son-in-law had traded for a pellet thing he saw on TV. Mr. Greeley refused my money for the elbows and screws. "Consider it an unadvertised special for people who keep roofs," he said. He loaded the stove with me, both of us breathing loud. "Tell me if you need a second set of hands," he added, which in our language is the same as saying, "I like the way you're doing this." Martha came with bread in one hand and a level in the other. We set the stove on fire, bricks plumbed the stack, and watched the first smoke find its line. "Draws good," she said. "Better than my cousin's bad marriage." We laughed the small laugh. People laugh when they've outlived something. When the house warmed, it smelled like creosote and old oak floors and the sort of heat you can lean your back into after church. I hung the certified deed in a cheap frame over the desk, not as a trophy, just as a reminder that promises are made out of ink before they're made out of wood. On the shelf, I put my mother's 2 county fair ribbons, apples and jams, and the photo of me in uniform she liked to overdust. Tanya called that night and didn't leave a message. The second time she called, she did. "I got loud," she said to the machine. "Loud felt like love growing up." "It isn't. You did what you said you'd do. I don't know how to stand in that yet." The third time she asked about the stove. Does it crackle? She said softer like a kid. I called her back. We talked about wood species, like people talk about the weather when they mean I still want you around. We said we'd try a Sunday dinner without poking the bear. We meant we'll live into the new rules. Sunday after church, the VFW coffee crowd didn't clap, because we don't clap for what's supposed to be. But the commander gripped my hand and said, "Seen a lot of folks win loud. Seen fewer win quiet. Proud of the quiet ones." The diner put an extra pat of butter on my pancakes like a secret medal. The treasurer's sunflower pin winked when she passed my booth. Misty from the recorder sat with a crossword and pretended not to watch people walk by my table the way a mother pretends not to watch a kid pedal his first two-wheeler. A week later, Earl parked at the lane with a stack of split maple in the bed. He didn't unload it. He waited until I opened the gate, then handed me the keys as if they were too heavy to keep. You tell me where he said? We stacked wood on pallets he taught me to use years ago, so air can do its work. We didn't talk about court. We talked about moisture content and how sycamores always drop bark like they're bored. He wiped his neck with a rag and looked at the roofline. You ran that ridge straight, he said, as if he'd been assigned to report on one thing and chose truth. Before he left, he stood too long by the mailbox and patted the post twice. When a man is sorry in this county, he finds things to pat. When the check came through from Harold's office, the roofer finished the last third clean and fast. He was a man with a pencil behind his ear and a way of talking to shingles like they listen. He refused to leave his sign in my yard. People know who does the work, he said. You don't need my advertisement. He put a hand on the warmed siding and said, "This place will remember you," then drove away before I could decide how to carry that. In the evenings, I sat by the stove and wrote receipts on the backs of envelopes in case someday I needed to show someone another quiet truth. I called the treasurer to ask about the homestead exemption, and she said we'll walk it together. I called the utility company to put the bill on budget, and the woman on the phone said I grew up on County Road 9. That sycamore still dropping thought so. I put my mother's cast iron back on the burner and fried apples the way she taught me with cinnamon so thin, you taste the fruit first. It snowed early in November. The ridge held. The stove kept. I slept inside on a mattress borrowed from Martha, listening to the heat tick and the wind get bored and go ruin someone else's intentions. In the morning, I found Dad's boot prints on the lane and a bag of salt on the porch with the top rolled neat. Galvanized nails do hold better through the first freeze. I don't know what happens to a story after the bench empties and people go home to their own rooms and their own folders. I know what happened to mine paper matched wood. Wood matched sky. Sky did what sky does and changed anyway. Respect, it turns out, isn't loud. It's showing up with your name spelled right and your hands doing the thing you promised. If you're listening to this and you've got your own folder, literal or not, here's what I learned in a small county that keeps its trophies in the hall. Stack what you can stack. Keep your receipts. Speak short. Let the quiet carry some of the weight. And if this story felt like something true, you've seen or needed, share it with someone who might sleep better, knowing paper can still win. If you want more plain-spoken stories like this about roofs names and the kind of justice that sounds like a bolt finding homestick around with us,